Jotam, how did you feel listening to what she had to say?
Well, first of all, it's the harshest comments we've heard so far from a very senior U.S. official on Israel's handling of the war. But I think she's right. I don't think that she's saying anything that isn't true. It's quite interesting, the timing, though. She's saying this just as an Israeli minister, Benny Gantz, is supposed to meet with her in Washington. And of course, she's also saying this as the Biden administration is getting more and more criticism for not doing more to stop the war, for continuing to support Israel. So I'm sure there has some domestic politics has to do with her comments, but nevertheless, her comments are very harsh, and Israel is feeling the pressure, both from the United States, but certainly from the international system.
Yeah, and look, many people, not least those who are living through all of this, hugely disappointed not to see the progress made over the weekend. What are the sticking points? It's all about a list, isn't it, of hostages, and Hamas absolutely insistent that they can't provide that whilst they're still being bombarded.
That's one thing, but it's also apparently, according to CNN, they spoke to one of the Hamas officials in charge of this, and then he said that Hamas is sticking with its demands for a ceasefire. Long-term ceasefire, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Now, that's delusional. No country in the world would allow a terrorist organization like Hamas to continue ruling a territory after committing the worst massacre in modern history. So Hamas is dragging this out, and you can ask yourself, why? Why, when the Gazans really, really need this ceasefire? Why are they dragging this out? They're doing it because that's their best card. As long as they have the hostages in tunnels, they have leverage over Israel. And as long as this war continues and the suffering in Gaza increases, the more pressure there'll be on Israel. And Israel will look as the bad guy in all of this, which it already is. That's the whole playbook of Hamas, to make the world forget what happened, what started this war, and to make Israel look as the only party in this conflict. So they are succeeding in that, and that's why they're dragging out these talks.
Jotam, I'd like to know your take on Ramadan. They're saying Ramadan gets in the way of all of this and will affect when a ceasefire, if a ceasefire was called. Could you just explain to me why that would be?
First of all, it's important to get a ceasefire before Ramadan, not only because of religious reasons. We know that during Ramadan, Muslims fast. They are already facing horrific humanitarian situation inside Gaza. So to be fasting in the middle of this is horrific. That's one thing. But the second thing is that usually every year during Ramadan in East Jerusalem, there are clashes between Palestinian worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is located on the Temple Mount, the holiest place for Jews, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest place for Muslims. Every year we see clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israeli police. Now, to avoid this from getting out of hand, Israel has to have a ceasefire in Gaza so that it can focus on East Jerusalem. To have two fronts at the same time that are flaming or really chaotic is very, very difficult for Israel, but also for the Palestinians. Now, Hamas is the one that has an interest in seeing this whole region ignited. So for Hamas, this also plays into the whole strategy when they're negotiating with Israel. If they can wait until Ramadan kicks off, and if they can see an ignition in East Jerusalem, maybe even in the West Bank, they're succeeding. That's what they're hoping for, that the entire Palestinian people will rise against Israel.
Just briefly, finally, Jotam, just bring us up to date on the mood in Israel. I mean, just last weekend we were reporting on big protests against Netanyahu and the police on horseback having to charge at crowds there and water cannon and the like. Are there still people with dissenting voices on the direction of travel?
Absolutely. This weekend we saw perhaps the biggest protest since the war began. People were ending a 4-day march from the Gaza border till Jerusalem, and thousands were demonstrating against the government. So absolutely, the anger is only growing. The longer the hostages are kept in Gaza, the more anger there is inside the Israeli population.